Israel was taken to court this morning over genocide charges filed by South Africa under the United Nations Genocide Convention. So over the next few days, the International Court of Justice is going to take up accusations outlined in an 84-page petition, marking the first time Israel's ever faced trial under this UN convention. The US and Israel have already dismissed the charges, with State Department spokesman John Kirby calling them counterproductive, and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken calling the report, which has 574 citations, meritless.
We find this submission meritless, counterproductive, and completely without any basis in fact whatsoever.
We decided to see if this report really was meritless, so we read through the entire thing to share with you all its key findings. Now, the filing isn't just about what's happened since October 7th. It frames the recent massacre in the context of the longer 75-year campaign Israel has waged to expel all Palestinians from historic Palestine, but for the sake of this video, we're going to focus on the evidence of genocide in just the last 96 days. The UN Genocide Convention identifies 5 different acts, any one of which, if committed, could constitute a genocide. South Africa's report provides evidence that Israel is guilty of all 5 acts and then an additional 3. First is the killing of Palestinians in large numbers. Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza is one of the largest in the history of modern warfare. In the last 3 months, Israel's caused more destruction than, proportionally, the Allied carpet bombing of Germany in World War II. The bombing has actually been so extreme that satellite analysts have said that it has actually changed the color and texture of Gaza as seen from space. At the time this document was written, Israel's murdered 21,110 Palestinians, 70% of whom are believed to be women and children. The document also notes an additional 7,780 people who are missing or believed to be under the rubble, which is why sometimes you see the number listed as 30,000 people dead. 1,779 families have lost multiple family members, and hundreds of families have been wiped out entirely, ending entire bloodlines. Israel has murdered 311 health workers, 209 education workers, and 103 journalists, which is over 1 per day, or 73% of all journalists killed in 2023. Israel has also murdered 144 UN workers, which is, quote, the highest number of aid workers killed in UN history in such a short time. But above all, experts say that Israel's war should be considered a war on children. In the first 3 weeks alone, Israel killed more children than all of the children killed in all of the conflict zones since 2019 combined. The second aspect of the genocide is the serious bodily and mental harm caused to Palestinians. 55,243 Palestinians have been injured as of the submission of this document, and among the injuries, burns and amputations are common. Because Israel's attacked so many hospitals in Gaza, most of them are completely non-functional, especially in the north, and most patients are, quote, reduced to waiting to die, slow, agonizing deaths from their injuries or from resultant infections. The filing also notes that before October 7th, surveys of children in Gaza showed that the majority of Gazan children were self-harming and experienced suicidal thoughts, which the filing notes will only dramatically worsen after 12 weeks of unending bombardment. An emergency coordinator with Doctors Without Borders returning from 5 weeks in Gaza said, quote, I'm speechless when I try to think of the future of these children. It's generations of children who will be handicapped, who will be traumatized. The very children in our mental health program are telling us they would rather die than continue living in Gaza now. The document also notes Israel's dehumanization of Palestinians, specifically the numerous instances of Palestinians being arrested, forced to strip, tortured, left in the cold, deprived of bathrooms, and all this being filmed and celebrated on Israeli Telegram channels. The document cites one such channel which was called 72 Virgins, Uncensored. The next aspect of the genocide is mass expulsion. It's estimated that 1.9 million of Gaza's total population of 2.3 million have been forced out of their homes. That's 85% of people in Gaza who are now homeless. The filing notes that the displacement of Palestinians is, for all intents and purposes, permanent, in the sense that even when those who have fled return home, they won't actually have homes to inhabit, since Israel has damaged or destroyed 60% of Gaza's housing stock. The fourth aspect of the genocide is the deprivation of access to food and water. This begins with Israel's, quote, complete siege of Gaza, which they announced on October 9th, but is also just an escalation of Israel's blockade on Gaza, which has been in place since 2006, as the report notes. Israel's siege has pushed Gaza to, quote, the brink of famine. 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people in the world right now live in Gaza, where, quote, an unprecedented 93% of the population is facing crisis levels of hunger. It's the highest level of hunger ever recorded on the IPC, which is a metric used by humanitarian organizations to measure the severity of food insecurity. 1 in 4 households has resorted to selling off their possessions to buy food, and many Palestinians are foraging, doing things like collecting spilled flour off of the road to survive. The emergency medical team's coordinator for the WHO said that, quote, every single person he speaks to is hungry. He said, everywhere we go, people are asking us for food, even in the hospital. I walked around in the emergency department and somebody with an open bleeding wound, an open fracture, they asked for food. If that's not an indicator of the desperation, I don't know what is. Oxfam and Human Rights Watch have expressly accused Israel of using food as a weapon of war. Israel has also cut off water to northern Gaza, and Israel's airstrikes have destroyed most of Gaza's water systems. The average person in Gaza currently has access to just 1.5 to 1.8 liters of water per day. This means 1.5 liters for all of your needs, like cooking and cleaning yourself, not just drinking, which is 10 times lower than the emergency threshold for war or famine-like conditions, which is 15 liters a day. Experts predict that more Palestinians will die of hunger, thirst, and disease than Israeli airstrikes, and some believe that may already be the case. While there are aid trucks going into Gaza, it's well below the amount needed. But on top of that, the UN Secretary General said that in the case of Gaza, the effectiveness of the humanitarian response can't be measured simply by counting the amount of money or trucks going into Gaza because A, there's nothing to buy with the money, and B, Israel has destroyed so much of Gaza's infrastructure that there's no way to actually distribute the aid going into Gaza. The fifth aspect of the genocide is the deprivation of access to shelter, clothes, hygiene, and adequate sanitation. As we've already said, there's really no shelter in Gaza at all. Israel's bombing has increased the population density in Gaza, which was already one of the most densely populated places on Earth, fourfold. There's now an estimated 12,000 people per square kilometer in Gaza, leaving, quote, no empty space left for people to shelter, not even in the streets and other open areas. In UNRWA shelters, where the quote, lucky ones stay, there are an average of 486 people using a single toilet. There's also an estimated 1 shower to every 4,500 people. And Israel's been routinely bombing these shelters, so to even call them shelters at this point is misleading. In the words of UNRWA's Commissioner General, in my 35 years of working in complex emergencies, I have never written such a letter predicting the killing of my staff and the collapse of the mandate I'm expected to fulfill. The sixth aspect of the genocide is the deprivation of medical assistance to Gaza. The filing states that Israel's attack on Gaza is, quote, above all else, an attack on Gaza's medical system. In a letter to the UN Security Council, the president of Doctors Without Borders wrote the following: Israel has shown a blatant and total disregard for the protection of Gaza's medical facilities. We're watching as hospitals are being turned into morgues and ruins. These supposedly protected facilities are being bombed, are being shot at by tanks and guns, encircled and raided, killing patients and medical staff. Medical staff, including our own, are utterly exhausted and in despair. They've had to amputate limbs from children suffering from severe burns without anesthesia or sterilized surgical tools. Due to forcible evacuations by Israeli soldiers, some doctors have had to leave patients behind after facing the unimaginable choice between their lives or those of their patients. There is no justification for the atrocious attacks on healthcare. Israel's also killed so many specialist doctors in Gaza that it'll undoubtedly undermine the future of healthcare in Gaza for years to come. At least 570 Palestinians have been killed in hospitals, some of whom have died because Israel cut off electricity and fuel to these hospitals. The complete unavailability of basic medicine and field dressings has caused disease to run rampant, with over 360,000 documented cases of communicable diseases reported in UNRWA shelters alone. On top of this, there's no anesthetic in Gaza either. One doctor describing treating a patient without anesthetic said, quote, I was forced to do dressing changes on massive wounds, excruciatingly painful wounds. There was a girl with just her whole body covered in shrapnel. She was 9. I ended up having to change and clean these wounds with no anesthetic and no analgesic. Her dad was crying, I was crying, and the poor child was screaming. The sheer number of people dying in hospitals has turned many of these hospitals into the site of mass graves, but the worst is still yet to come. In the words of the international president of Doctors Without Borders, when the guns fall silent is when, quote, the true scale of devastation will be revealed. The seventh aspect of the genocide is the destruction of Palestinian life in Gaza, referring to the fact that Israel has destroyed the very fabric of society in Gaza. Israel has not only destroyed refugee camps, hospitals, bakeries, entire neighborhoods, but also mosques, schools, libraries, historic sites, everything that makes life worth living. Israel has destroyed Gaza's main public library and hundreds of bookstores, publishing houses, and schools. Israel has targeted every single one of Gaza's 4 universities and has killed Gaza's leading scholars. Israel has damaged and destroyed several cultural centers and museums. It's targeted numerous historical sites, including a 2,000-year-old Roman cemetery that was slated to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Israel has targeted 318 Muslim and Christian religious sites, including the Great Amari Mosque, which is over 1,500 years old, and the Church of St. Porphyrius, which is believed to be the 3rd oldest church in the world. They've attacked Gaza City's Central Archive building, which contains over 100 years of records archived to tell the history of the Palestinian people. The filing notes that Israel is killing the very Palestinian people who create and keep alive the heritage, culture, and national identity of the Palestinian people. It lists journalists, teachers, intellectuals, public figures, doctors, nurses, filmmakers, writers, singers, the directors and deans of its universities, the heads of its hospitals, scientists, linguists, playwrights, novelists, artists, and musicians who have all been killed in what the report describes as an attempt to wipe out not just the Palestinian people, but their memory as well. The final aspect of the genocide are the measures Israel has imposed intended to prevent Palestinian births. Israel kills an estimated 2 mothers every hour in Gaza, with multiple eyewitnesses reporting Israeli soldiers killing pregnant women as well. An estimated 5,500 pregnant women in Gaza are giving birth every month in unsafe conditions, in open areas, in rubble, in overrun hospitals, and without clean water. Pregnant women needing C-sections are doing so without anesthetic. The number of premature births has increased 25 to 30%, and Palestinian babies are increasingly dying from preventable causes. Medical shortages are also forcing doctors to perform unnecessary hysterectomies on Palestinian women to save their lives, leaving them unable to have children. The term genocide was coined in 1944 by a Polish Jewish lawyer and the son of Holocaust victims, Raphael Lemkin, to give name to what many had called up until then a crime without a name. The UN Genocide Convention was convened soon after, in 1948, to ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust were never repeated. Raphael Lemkin was once asked what a piece of paper would do to stop another Hitler, to which he replied, "Only man has law. Law must be built. Do you understand me? You must build the law." As long as Israel is able to avoid prosecution, the Genocide Convention really will just be a meaningless piece of paper. So South Africa's petition is really a service to the world, because it's given the world the opportunity to make these words truly mean something.